concludes the panel. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. McClintock. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. We had Sheriff Daniels before this committee a few weeks ago, gentlemen, and he testified that the border had never been more secure than it was in 2018. He had never seen it more broken than it is currently. Mr. Fabricatore, why would people south of the border throw their IDs down before getting to the border?
They don't want people to know who they are. That's the exact reason they try to lose their ID.
So you're saying they throw their IDs down, nobody knows who they are, they come in the country. You know, in Prattville a few months ago, I had a 14-year-old girl, it's alleged that an illegal, drug her into a restroom and raped her in a restaurant there in Prattville, Alabama, in my district. 29-year-old, identified as an unaccompanied minor. He didn't have any ID. And it was found out later he was from Honduras and he actually had a criminal record. So you think they throw their IDs down so we just don't know who they are then?
Exactly.
Gotcha. Mr. Schoenleben, that's a Southern way of pronouncing your name. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that Chilean nationals are actually turning themselves in. Are they turning themselves into the CBP? Is that what's going on?
No, Your Honor.
Yep, that's close enough.
No, sir. Colombians are turning themselves in and claiming asylum at the border. Once they get into the border, they wait a few days in detention, and then they're released with a promise to appear in court, which they never do. And so criminal organizations are targeting that method of entry on purpose. Once they're into the country, then they can commit crime at will, and they're doing so in a fairly sophisticated manner.
So that explains the increase in break-ins you're seeing. Is that Colombians you think that are doing that, or is it? Well,
in general, it's everyone. Crime is going through the roof on all scales, both domestic and international, but that's part of our problem. We keep talking about the different groups that are committing crime. There's no question that domestic criminals are committing crime here. That's part of the problem. When we start importing criminals who are already criminals in their country, and then you add that to law enforcement, which is already at a breaking point, that's a problem. Quick example, Irvine, California, which is considered one of the safest cities in the country, recently for 6 months straight had to deploy detectives in overtime capacity to try to combat this very problem. And while they had streets flooded with detectives, they were still hit by transnational organized crews committing crimes such as residential burglaries. So these law enforcement agencies are already stretched thin, and then you add that element of exploitation, it's a breaking point.
We had a hearing in Yuma, Arizona, and the law enforcement agents there testified, or told us actually, during testimony, that they had 109 different countries come through that one small town. But the interesting thing, I think, was that the border agents have almost become concierge guys. They're not doing the job anymore, what we want, law enforcement going out actually patrolling the border. They have become concierge, and they're in processing people. And here's an interesting thing. Under this administration, they instantly can apply for asylum. So they get a cell phone, and then they get taxpayer subsidies up to about $900 a month. The thing is, they take our phones, but they don't take our calls when it's time to show up to court. And so doing away with the Remain in Mexico policy, they're throwing their IDs down, they're pouring across the southern border. And Mr. Batista, I want to mention this to you. Mr. Ray, director of FBI, testified in here yesterday that he was having a very difficult time controlling crime, especially concerning fentanyl, because it is pouring in across. Do you think the open border, Mr. Batista, is making your job more difficult? Is that why we're seeing the statistics go up in your neighborhoods with increased crime?
Chairman McClintock, Mr. Moore, I believe that we need to have strong border security without a doubt. And I do believe that the influx of fentanyl is coming from different parts of the world and definitely afflicting our communities.
Interesting testimony we also heard, and you may have heard this, but what's happening, the cartel are actually allowing these people to become drug mules. And so they're coming, just south of the border, you're $4 or $5 grand if you're coming from Mexico to come into our country. You're gonna pay about $7,000 or $8,000 if you're coming from the Triangle Nations. Last I heard, Russians were paying $19,000 and Syrians were paying $20,000 to the cartel. But here's the deal, if you don't have the money, gentlemen, you can backpack heroin and cocaine or fentanyl across that U.S. southern border. So you're not an indentured servant or a slave to the cartel. You're actually now a drug mule. So the border policies with the Biden administration are creating two things in this country, either drug mules or indentured slaves to the cartel. And so they're making those installment payment backs. And so, Mr. Rosenberg, how many years have you been coming here hoping to get some resolve for the loss of your son? And you said, that's why I didn't offer condolences, because you said you've gotten more condolences than you can count. You need actually some kind of commitment. How long have you been fighting this battle?
Well, I started in early 2011, mostly working in California, and ironically, mostly working on people driving without licenses, not an immigration issue. You know, the guy who killed my son probably fit the description of someone who came here to better their life. Other than driving the wrong way on a one-way street, driving without a license, we couldn't find any crimes he had committed in 12 years. Problem is,
Just took one.
so he wasn't a threat to public safety till he killed my son.
Right. Well,
But if he hadn't been here, it wouldn't have happened. And other than
sorry,
COVID, pretty much once or twice a year.
I'm running out of time, so
you're
with
out
that,
of
Mr. Chairman,
time.
I will
Thank
yield
you.
back, but thank you for being here.
Mr.